And good morning, everyone. Happy Tuesday morning to you. Welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. Now, I'm going to try to make today's video as brief as possible. I just want to follow up on the point that I made yesterday because it is such a critical point. I've made the observation that when Revelation chapter 11, verse 15, says the kingdoms of our God, the kingdoms of this world have become the kingdoms of our God and of His Christ, and He shall rule forever and forever. People very often scoff at that, and I've had people, in fact, a gentleman that I used to know, very prominent minister in the churches of Christ. The ironic thing about this guy was, and he was a brilliant scholar. He was a professor at Harding University for years, wrote several books, and like I said, he was quite a scholar. But nonetheless, in debating against dispensationalists, okay, and he debated many of them, wrote books against them, he would say things like, the dispensationalists expect us to be able to see. They want us to see, to see, to see. They don't see David sitting on a physical throne. They don't see Jesus sitting on a physical throne. They don't see Jerusalem restored as the capital of the world, and on and on and on. And he would say, much like I did yesterday, they're looking at the kingdom through the wrong kind of eyes. Well, some years ago, before his unfortunate death, he wrote a series of articles in response to covenant eschatology. And of course, those of us who believe in covenant eschatology believe the Lord came in AD 70. Well, guess what? This gentleman, and he was a gentleman, by the way, great guy, wonderful man. Anyway, in his debates against dispensationalism, what did he do? He went to Matthew chapter 24, 29 to 34, and he said, see, Christ came in AD 70. Anyone can see that if they're looking through the proper eyes of faith. But when he was writing against covenant eschatology, what did he say? Oh, my eyes are not seeing what my ears are hearing. And he made the absolute identical arguments against covenant eschatology that the dispensationalists made against his eschatology, which he rejected because they were looking through carnal eyes. They were expecting physical realities, not spiritual. And this is part of the irony of both amillennialism and postmillennialism in our world today. What do we find? We find both the amillennialist and the postmillennialist telling us, Matthew chapter 24, 29 to 34, this is very clearly a prediction of Jesus' coming in judgment of Old Covenant Israel in AD 70. This is the use of typical Jewish Hebraic literature that was never intended to be taken literally. Jesus did come on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory and with the angels, and he did come in judgment. And he came in that generation. But then they go to passages using that identical language, and they apply it to a yet future end of human history. Now, I bring this up because notice what happens. In the amillennial and in the postmillennial world, you have the acknowledgement, as I just noted, of the fulfillment of Matthew 24, 29 to 34 in the first century in the judgment of Jerusalem. And they take us to Luke chapter 21, and they say, well, you see, there was terror throughout the whole Roman Empire in the first century, just like Luke 21, 25 to 26 says there was. It all happened in that generation. But then they go to Matthew chapter 25, 31 and following, when it says all the nations of the earth shall be gathered before him. And they say, look, Preston, did you see every kingdom of this world? What, were they gathered at the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70? I didn't see it. Did you see it? My eyes are not seeing what my ears are hearing. Oh, but wait, you're looking with the wrong eyes if you believe that Matthew 24, 29 and following is yet future. No, no, no. You got to see that with spiritual eyes. We are told. But you don't look at Matthew 25, 31 and following through spiritual eyes. Now, the point is, ladies and gentlemen, Matthew chapter 25, 31 and following is absolutely positively the same scene as Revelation chapter 11, 15 and following. Revelation chapter 11. Now, watch this. In Revelation chapter 11, what do we have? We have the time of the judgment of the city where the Lord was crucified. Oh, wait a minute. That's Matthew 24, 29 to 31 through verse 34, which my amillennial and postmillennial friends say, oh, that was in AD 70. Okay, we come to Revelation chapter 11, and you have the judgment of the city where the Lord was crucified. And it's at that time the kingdoms of this world have become the kingdoms of our God and of his Christ. But what happens? Oh, well, we're told Matthew 25, 31 is resurrection. And a great number of amillennial and postmillennial scholars say Revelation chapter 11 is AD 70. Peter Leithart does. Kenneth Gentry does. Gary DeMar does. Where do we draw that line of distinction in Matthew chapter 24 to delineate between the time of the judgment, the time of the resurrection, the time of the kingdom, in Matthew 25, 31 and following, and the time of the judgment, the time of the kingdom, the time of the resurrection in Revelation chapter 11, which these men posit as fulfilled in AD 70. Well, you see, these same men, good men all, they tell us, well, you see, Matthew chapter 25, 31 and following is different from Matthew 24. Upon what basis? Their preconceived ideas. Not because of linguistics, not because of context, but because of preconceived ideas about context and about the narrative itself. The point I'm trying to drive home here, ladies and gentlemen, is the absolutely perfect parallel between Matthew chapter 24, 29 to 34, Matthew 25, 31 through 46, and Revelation chapter 11. Two of these chapters are acknowledged by many, many, many amillennialists, many, many, many postmillennialists as fulfilled in AD 70. But then, although the passages are absolutely parallel with one another, they rip Matthew chapter 25, 31 and following out of that parallelism. And they say, oh, well, Matthew chapter 25, 31 and following, that's the end of time. That's the end of the Christian age. And there's absolutely no justification for it whatsoever. Once we do see the beautiful harmony between Matthew chapter 24, 29 through 34, Matthew chapter 25, 31 and following, and Revelation chapter 11, 15 and following, then guess what? Futurism completely falls to the ground. Let me recommend to you that you get my book, We Shall Meet Him in the Air, The Wedding of the King of Kings, in which you demonstrate the absolutely perfect parallels between both epistles of Thessalonians and the Olivet Discourse. No division in the Olivet Discourse, and yet perfect parallels between the Discourse and Thessalonians, proving that Thessalonians was fulfilled in AD 70. That's another subject. And I said I was going to keep this brief today, so I'm out of time. Thanks again for joining me. I'll see you on the flip side.